Hey guys! So we're back.
We're back.
I'm so happy. Okay.
We're together. We're together again.
No one's on vacation anymore, which sucks.
We're back in Montreal, where it's fall now, except it's the heat.
It's like 35 degrees outside. I love
really
the summer,
hot.
but I hate this. I'm sweating.
I'm done.
It's
I
disgusting.
didn't ask for this.
I didn't ask for this.
I didn't ask for this. I love fall, but it's like I can't get super into the mood because of this heat. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm so happy we're back. And oh, sorry.
No.
Okay.
Yes.
So we're back and we're gonna be discussing. I hope you guys saw videos. The oh my god.
Our highly anticipated and much talked about Pillow Talk episode.
Our Pillow Talk
Yeah,
episode.
I hope you liked it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we're gonna do some more pillow talks. So
I really like that format.
Me
It's like
too.
really casual,
too.
informal.
Just like on your bed.
It's literally on my bed. Just
Yeah.
on your,
very-
you know, it's very casual. Very casual.
So today we're back and we're going to be talking about a very interesting issue, about an issue that we don't talk a lot, but I think it's time that people should start discussing about it more. It's racism in Canada. And so let's just start. So so what I've realized, me as a person, about racism in Canada is how subtle it is, and how we barely talk about racism towards natives, towards African Canadians or blacks, and just towards everyone, right? And I remember reading this article about I think she's a teacher, Dr. Alpha Cooper. Yeah, she's a teacher in Toronto, and she basically said something that was very interesting about race, why we don't talk about race in Canada, and also why it seems that in Canada there's no racism. So she talked about how we don't talk about 200 years of slavery in Canada, where most of them were natives and blacks. So we don't talk about it, and we don't talk about it because we talk about the underground railroad. So it gives like this sensation of this, that black people came to Canada.
And they were instantly free of prejudice and slavery, and they were equal citizens, but
But once some of
not
them
the
got
case.
there, once a few blacks got there, it was even worse. Some of them went back to slavery again, I don't know the statistics. I don't want to start talking, as if, but it's even worse. So basically, okay. So now we start. My question is: did any of you girls face any racism in Canada that made you feel uncomfortable?
Do you want to start?
Yeah. I think it's important to kind of, first of all, one of the reasons that we're talking about racism in Canada is I have friends who are from the U.S. and I listen to a lot of what's going on in the U.S. right now, and everyone always says, oh, Canada, let's just move to Canada, things are so much better in Canada. But Canada is a colonial state. Canada is just as guilty of genocide as the United States is. Just because we're polite and say A doesn't mean that our country is absolved from the horrors of genocide and femicide, which is ongoing in Canada in Indigenous communities.
Yes.
So the type of racism that I have experienced as a Latina woman has been very passive racism, nothing super aggressive and in your face. A lot of really just microaggressive bullshit. One of the clearest incidents is a couple years ago I was out having brunch with my family. Me, my mom, my two sisters. We're talking Spanish to each other because we are Mexican. That is our first language. So we're talking to each other in Spanish, and the waiter comes up to us and he just starts talking to us in Spanish, and it's a really, really broken Spanish. I don't understand what he's saying, so naturally, all four of us are trilingual. We speak English, French, and Spanish, so we flip back to English because we don't understand what the fuck this guy is saying. So this guy, even though all four of us are talking to him in English, continues to talk to us in Spanish and starts talking to us about how lovely the beaches in Mexico are. I was so furious because this guy was not understanding that we weren't there to fucking practice his Spanish with him. We were there to get a fucking omelet and some crepes and maybe a fucking smoothie, and he just kept talking to us in Spanish, and I was just so furious because I just told him, I'm like, can you please stop talking to us in Spanish? We don't understand what you're saying. And he says to us in broken Spanish, oh, but I've practiced for like 10 years, and I'm like, well, it isn't doing any good because you still suck. And it's that kind of like racism. It's like really passive and like innocent racism, and it's gross. What about you, Dan?
Yeah, I haven't really had any experiences that are like obviously racist. It's again like with like you, Mariana. It's like really passive microaggressions. The same thing always happens to me when I'm like just out and about like shopping. I think the last incident where something like this happened to me was when I was just shopping for shoes, and the person who worked there, who's white guy, he just started talking to me in Tagalog because I'm from I'm Filipina. So he just started talking to me in Tagalog, and I don't fluently speak Tagalog, but I understand. And he was calling me like maganda, which means like beautiful. And I was just like, I'm done with this shit. Like it happens to me all the time, and it happens to my family also. Like when we're going out, or they're older, or people will just like catcall and think that I'm some like a different type of Asian. Like most of the time they'll start talking either in like Chinese or in Japanese, which like those are like I don't speak those languages either, but like I can recognize it because it happens a lot. But it's just like, and then I'm just like, oh gosh, like I'm just like number one, you're racist. Number two, you're super racist because you can't even tell that I'm like not that type of Asian. Like what? Oh my gosh. But a lot of the time, I think the most racism that I've observed in Canada hasn't been really towards me, but it's been like around me. Like in certain gatherings that I like participate in. I don't know, like a family. Yeah, we can talk about that.
I remember that.
We can talk about that family gathering. Okay, so I think it was my birthday.
Yeah.
2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And my cousin's boyfriend, like we had never met her boyfriend. And
didn't she bring him uninvited?
She brought him uninvited.
That's family drama on the side.
That's drama. That's family drama on the side. But like honestly, like where are the boundaries? There are none. Like it's like even though I try to set boundaries, my family tries to set boundaries. Like the boundaries are gonna break.
Hashtag families of color.
Exactly. Families of color. What are boundaries? And she brought her boyfriend, and I don't know what the fuck he was talking about. Like,
so we were just hanging out in the living room, and like your cousin, right? Your cousin and her boyfriend and the daughter.
And he's white. He's a white man.
Yeah.
Right?
So they were kind of sitting next to us on the couch, having their own conversation. Yeah. And then me, Diane, and another friend of ours were sitting like just on the other side of the couch having our own conversation. Yeah. So I overhear them talking to like your cousin's daughter, saying that like she shouldn't have so many black friends because like black friends are lazy. And like
yes, that's what it was. I think it was directly targeted to Haitians.
Yeah, like some like racist white bullshit like that. And then I was in shock because this is a white man in a space that is not his, majoritarily a space dominated by women of color, and your cousin and your cousin's daughter were just like laughing with him, and I lost my shit and I snapped, and I'm like, how and like I played stupid. I'm like, oh well, how do you know? Like I just butted in. I'm like, how do you know all Haitians are lazy? Oh well, have you met all of them? That's a lot of people. Where do you have the time? Do you have a job? How do you survive? Like just asking him really stupid questions.
I was so happy.
And he got so angry. He was so angry, and then your cousin got angry at me also because like she's like, no one's talking to you, and I'm like, well, this is a party, right? We should all be talking to each other.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, it's like this is so it happens so much in Filipino communities, but like I guess in general there's a big like there's anti-blackness a lot in Asian communities, but what I've noticed in my Filipino community, it's very insidious, and it's like sometimes my Filipino family members won't be instigating it, but it's like it'll happen and then we'll just play along.
Same in I can't speak for any other Latino community, but in the Mexican community there is also a lot of anti-blackness. Yeah. And in my family I've had to like shut shit down. Yeah. Because it's there, it's prevalent, and it's like they don't even understand what they're saying.
Exactly. So I'm really glad that you did that, because I struggle with calling things out. Like I'm trying to be better at doing that. Like when something, like if you see something, do something. But it's hard for me to still do that. So I was really happy when you did that, and like we just like you, me, and like my other friend, we just like went in our room and we're like, F this, we're not gonna be a part of this living room.
Because like
it was just
like the boyfriend, the cousin, they were just like screaming at us and like telling us to shut up and like be quiet, like we should stay in our lane.
I felt number one super embarrassed because I'm like, oh my god, I don't like, why is this happening? But at the same time, I'm like, I like this had to happen, you know?
Yeah. Like I just wanted to be like, you weren't even invited. Get out of here.
And that's a really good, what you did is a really good way to call people out. It's just like pretend that you don't know what they're talking about. So if you hear something racist or sexist or anything, and just like, what do you mean?
Yeah, get them to explain
because then you'll see like they're gonna try to explain it, and as they explain it, they realize how ridiculous it sounds, or they don't, but they still sound ridiculous, you know? And something else, like in my last job, I had a coworker who, because we call a lot of people at our job, and she talked to someone who sounded Asian, but then after she hung up the phone, she was like, oh, all these these Asians, they don't know how, like they don't speak English, or like they don't, and then I'm just like what? And then she looked, and then I heard this, but then without me kind of addressing her, and she looks up from, because she said she sat across from me, and she looks up and she's like, no offense. And then I'm like,
okay.
Like, and then I'm like, what do you mean though? Like, and then she's like, no, yes, it's just. And then
they just like, oh well,
exactly. And then I just like, I'm done.
So
I'm tired.
For me, I have dealt so much racism. It's implicit, but it's also very. I can say it. Because what I've felt with, so I've lived around. I've been very lucky to travel when I was a kid, and I've seen racism around the world. I won't say around the world, but in different parts of the world. And I've always realized that racism, for example, in South Africa with the whites and Africans, the black South Africans, and even when I was in Congo and there was a few white people that were around, and in France and Belgium, it's really in your face. It's direct. You know exactly what you're getting. So the thing is that although it's horrible, at least I know where I stand. Canadian racism has really fascinated me, and how subtle it is, and the cognitive dissonance of the way they do their thing is really very surprising. So when the first time I came to Canada, basically, I was in school, like I was in high school. No, I'll start with the first thing. I was in primary school. So I remember, because there was like the Loi 101. So if you come and if you're in Quebec,
it's a Quebec bill governing language.
So you need to go to it's not Quebec. No, that's nothing. It's not Loi 101. But anyway, there's a thingy where you come to, if you go to a school, primary school, you need to go to a French school. So immigrants have to go to a French school, and that's how it works, So I remember going there, and then
in the attempts of preserving the French language.
Yeah, there you go.
That's a different argument. That's a difference.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. So I was there, and I remember the teachers, because they said, the question was, so you're from Africa? I'm like, yeah, I'm from Congo. I'm like, oh, okay, do they speak French in Congo? And you're a kid, so you can't really look how problematic. It's a good question. It's a question that it can be problematic, but it couldn't be problematic, but it's anyway. So I said, well, they should know that, when the French and the Belgian came to it, didn't only come to Canada. They went to Africa. They went to Australia. Well, that was more the English, right? So I said, we speak French in Congo because it was colonized by the Belgian and by the Portuguese a long time ago. So so I do speak French, and then. To make me so they want me to go to do French over again. So they were finding ways for me to go back. So I had to get out of class and learn French with a teacher, And I was like, but it's my mother tongue, It's French is my mother tongue, basically. And I found myself like they were really trying to find an excuse to say, oh, he doesn't speak French because he's from Africa, so we have to make sure he goes. So that's what happened. So I had to be kicked out during my math class, do some French, listen to a teacher telling me that tu peux-tu monter en haut? And I was like, listen,
Listen,
yes,
Becky.
yes. I was in South Africa for 5 years and I went to an
Sorry,
English
so what
class.
he just said in
Oh, yeah.
French is grammatically incorrect.
Incorrect. I'm so sorry. Like, because it's just grammatically incorrect because you can't monter en
It's
haut. You
basically,
can't, yeah.
can you go up upstairs?
Upstairs,
kind of
you know?
like in English.
So
yeah.
I was like really surprised, and I'm like, maybe it's the way they talk, but like, to me, it's just like if you want to tell me like my French is broken, I'm so sorry. Like,
No.
no, okay, it's like you're a teacher, like maybe between friends, you'll talk like that, but in an academic experience, there's a way. And don't tell me again. Anyway, so that was like the small thing that happened.
I mean,
Yeah,
I would argue that is not a small thing.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
that they're trying to control your education
Like,
by
Controlling your
limiting.
speech,
Yeah.
controlling like
Yeah.
you.
The second time was in high school with a few people around
Just
me.
pull out, like, do we have like a death note?
Yeah.
Just like, I'm
The
gonna tell
second
you all the
time-
fucked up things that happened.
But again, it was done with a smile, right?
Yeah.
So the second time was
Hashtag Canada.
the second time was in high school, and I remember them asking me again, "Are you from Congo? How'd you get over here?" It was because I don't know, like it's poor in Africa and everything. How did you manage to get to Canada? And then at that point, I remember I was like getting old, so I was like becoming a bit more snappy. So I said,
Yeah.
so I said, yeah, it was very difficult. It was very difficult. I was wearing like a small thingy.
A loincloth?
I was wearing a loincloth, and we came in the dead
It
of
was-
winter. And it was so cold. I'm so sorry about what I said, but I said it. I was like, it was so cold. They had to chop off my.
Your penis. You can say
Well,
penis.
Did you really say that?
Yes,
How old
yes.
were you?
I was like 13. And they really believed me.
Of course they
But
did.
you know
Oh
what
my
you know what I
God.
realized? Because like the way they were asking the question, they were like laughing. But once I played the game with them, they felt uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So
Welcome to my world.
they felt uncomfortable because they suddenly, I don't know, they knew what they were doing. They knew what
Yeah.
they were saying. And they knew that if they said in a very ha way, like if you're not fast enough, you don't realize. And another time it was in the village. I'm gonna talk about racism in the LGBTQI.
Yeah,
because,
that would be a really good topic
yeah.
as well.
So I was walking, and then there was a guy who I think must have had problems. I don't like saying that, but he came and then he did like a monkey sound, and then like he had a banana and he threw it at my brother and me, and what it didn't bother me. It came from me. It was the reaction of the other people. I turned around and I saw just them smiling, as if it was funny. So to me, that's what Canadian racism is.
Yeah.
It's very subtle. It's done with a smile. So it disarms you basically. But once you live long enough, you then suddenly see how it works. Yeah.
Especially when you look back in retrospect at all the things that happened to you as a kid,
As a kid,
by
yeah.
other kids, and it's just like it's perpetuated through generations, like, and it's
Yeah.
super insidious.
Yeah. So it's very insidious, and we can talk about just the government right now, right? So we know Lynn Sidiak.
Yeah, she's a Canadian senator, and a couple years ago, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came to a close, and it was basically a governmental look at the trauma of residential schools, which were state-authorized penitentiaries for Indigenous children. The first one opened it up in the 1800s, and the last one closed in like the 1960s. So generations upon generations of Indigenous children were ripped from their families and assimilated into Canadian society, and that's if they survived, because there are, in Vancouver, for example, behind one of the old residential schools, there is a mass grave of Indigenous children's bodies because they died. They weren't cared for. So the commission was basically looking at how the Canadian government and Indigenous communities can come together and move forward from the trauma. So they basically did that. It closed. They made a bunch of suggestions. Nothing has been done. surprised.
Yeah.
And one of the Canadian senators, what's her name again?
Lynn Sadak.
Lynn Sadak. She said that a lot of good came from
out.
the
Some good
residential
came out of
schools.
that.
And this is a Canadian senator, like.
Again, when I say the cognitive dissonance
Yeah.
in that sentence, there's a privilege, but just the cognitive dissonance. It's, for example, I've realized when once you talk about race in Canada to Canadians, to white Canadians, and to also Quebecers, it's like they get super duper angry.
Yeah.
Like, we're not racist.
It's just really like,
Yeah.
not in my country,
Yeah, in my
but
country.
it's like, yes,
in the
yes,
States,
it is.
in the States, but not over
It's
here.
like I might be white, but I'm not racist.
Yeah.
And they get very like super angry about it. And I'm just like, why are they angry?
Mhm.
Because, and I've also realized when you talk about, even like when looking at the commission that happened a while ago, I don't remember when it was. There was a commission that was in Quebec basically, where they went around, Quebec cities, well, not Quebec City, but just around some cities, and they talked to people about racism and all that, right? And they just said people talk about, like the people from the city would come and like talk and defend their cause. Me as a white person, I don't think there's racism, or me as a native, that's what's happening. And I remember watching it, and I remember like it was interesting that they did that. It was a good cause, like it's good that you go and you talk to people. But I found the way it was done was all over the place. First, the ones who were doing it was white people. It was just white people
Like,
going
how
to
can-
the cities
how-
and talking about
How
it.
can you talk about racism and like everyone on that panel is all white?
It's all white.
Like how?
Like it doesn't.
It's
make
like,
sense.
of course it's going to be one-sided because you're all white. Like,
Yeah.
I just,
And while it is a good thing, like I'm glad they did it, it's just I think you have to start thinking who should maybe create those kind of discussions. Bring, for example, natives. When we look at natives, we barely talk about them because we've pushed them aside.
Yeah.
And every time, for example, I think we're going all over the place, but in Vador, there was a case where Native women were being raped by police officers.
Not just one case. One woman came forward,
Yes.
and then that opened up the floodgates.
The
So
floodgates, yeah.
many indigenous women came forward and said that they had been raped by the Val-d'Or police officers. So then a commission started. They looked into it, and they found that yes, it is true. The police officers have been raping these women for years.
Yeah, but they got away with it.
They got away with it.
They got away with it, as usual. Like it's not new,
Surprising
but
no one.
they got away with it. And I remember like this guy, like just looking at the people from Vador, and then when we talk about that issue, they would always say, "No, we have fine police officers in Vador. Why would they do that to Native women?" But the one thing that totally shocked me, the one thing that really shocked me,
Is it that article that you? Yeah.
it's an article, and I saw on TVA and all that. TVA is like
It's a news channel.
a news channel in Quebec, basically. Yeah, so there's a math. I forgot his name. So he said he lives in Quebec City, and he has this show.
we
And
can
then-
link it, by the way.
Yeah, we
Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
link it in the show notes.
Yeah, and he just said it, how could our officers rape the Native women? They're not very pretty, and our officers are handsome. And we haven't it's just
That's just so fucked on like
it's
so many
it's
different
so
levels.
disturbing because we've talked as usual in Canada we talk about this and we talk about in 2 minutes, so as you can see it was racism, and then we just set it aside. But to have a person, he still has his job, he's still working, he's still doing his thing, making money. But for him saying that and not really having a big discussion on
Not
how
even that. There was no repercussions
no
for his
repercussions,
racist comments.
It's extremely disturbing. It's violent as F-U-C-K. It's extremely violent, and
And it's traumatizing
it's traumatizing.
for Native women. Like, for us to hear that, it's like.
And it
traumatizing.
also like plays into that idea that rape is about sexual attraction and
Yes.
not power.
Not power. There you go.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so disgusting.
It really is, and that's just, and this is why I've always said, like, I have a question. I don't know if we can answer it, but with what we talked about, what do you think when we talk about racism to white Canadians, and why do they get angry? Why do they get angry?